Hello and welcome to the Responsible Edge podcast with me, Charlie Martin. The Responsible Edge podcast is your go-to source for lessons in how to implement ethical and effective marketing strategies. So today, on today's show, I was absolutely delighted to be joined by Karen Revel-Chion. Karen is a superb marketeer with many years of experience, most notably working as the former marketing director of Alwyn, the UK national lottery operator. And she also spent an earlier part of her career working with some of the world's largest FMCG brands, predominantly in drinks. So she really is again a fantastically experienced marketeer that we've managed to convince to join us on the show. So hope you're going to get a lot of value from hearing from Karen. In terms of the conversation itself, we focused on some really interesting things. The first was sort of the ethics of marketing, something like gambling, which obviously from her experience of working with the UK National Lottery was particularly interesting. And in particular, we went and looked at the impact of regulation on the creative process and on some of the marketing sort of practices and procedures that she was implementing during her time there. So really interesting stuff on the role of regulation and the impact that it has on the creative process. And then finally, I won't ruin it by giving it all away, but Karen had some really good bits of advice, or really good piece of advice, should I say, for any kind of junior marketeers out there regarding the importance of reading the room. So I'll leave it to her to explain in more detail. But just want to say a big thanks to Karen for giving us some of her time. Hope you guys out there really enjoy the show. As always, please feel free to leave any comments where you can on any of our materials. Thanks again for listening. Well, Karen, let's just kick things off perhaps by it would just be great to hear a bit more about you, a bit more about your background and experience, and feel free to sort of kick off wherever you like. But just keen for our listeners to get to know Karen.
Okay, well, more years than I care to remember. I started off my career as a graduate trainee at Mars, which was a pretty good introduction to the world of commercial world and the world of marketing. Obviously, excellent training. Interestingly, it was in the time when the internet was just being born, so a lot has changed during my career. But I've managed to pull together a career full of FMCG companies, drinks companies, toy companies, lots of fun. I did a stint in Hong Kong for 3 years where I managed a portfolio of drinks brands around Asia Pacific. I had to come back before I died because it was a very full-on experience marketing whiskey and cognac mostly to the Asian and Australian market. And I actually never thought that I'd end up being involved with the National Lottery. That was quite a surprise in my career. But the brand is essentially an FMCG brand. It's an impulse brand in many cases. It's displayed in retail. These days, it's very much an online product as well. So it was a pleasant turn in my career that found me working not once but twice for the National Lottery. Once about 10 years ago, looking after the EuroMillions brands. And then much more recently, I got involved in the successful bid for the National Lottery license with Alwyn, who are the new operator. So that was great. It was a really fun experience, very full on, quite a roller coaster ride, but we were successful. A great experience.
Fantastic. Karen, let me just take you back to, I know you mentioned FMCG and the commonality between drinks and the lottery, or working on a lottery. What were the other kind of similarities, differences? What were the things that you really noticed from a marketing perspective, moving from one sector to another?
I think, I think it becomes a different ball game when you're working in an industry that's regulated. So if you think about, these days, most things are regulated. Even chocolate and cereals have the high sugar and fat regulation around them. But the big ones are obviously drinks, pharmaceuticals and health care generally, and gambling and the lottery. So my first step into that was when I worked for drinks. Because as you can imagine, alcohol throughout the world is regulated. I mean, in the UK, under 18s aren't allowed to drink, etc., etc. Was for a long time a voluntary watershed that you wouldn't advertise alcohol brands before 9:30. Things have changed a little bit on that, but it's a regulated industry. The way you market it has its restrictions because ultimately it's not a product for everyone, and it's not a product that should be freely available to everyone. And I think that's quite a similarity. Once you're used to the idea that I can't just do what I think I want to do, there's a regulation here for the good of the consumer, for the good of the public, that puts the brake on some of the things that you might feel are commercially very lucrative, but actually potentially not, not great for the consumer. So I think that's the biggest similarity between where I've been and where I come from. This regulation pops up every now and then.
Really interesting, Karen. And I've got loads of questions on that in particular, but one that jumps to mind is, does that kind of, the impact of that, does that force you to think, do you think, more creatively about your marketing in terms of, we have these rules and stipulations, so we've got to think outside that? I hate using the term, but I'm going to, outside the box, blue sky thinking sort of thing.
I think, yeah, you absolutely do. You really do have to think, okay, I can't use this channel that would be really easy. I can't use it. So for example, let's take an example. If I think about drinks, football on Sky TV in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday afternoon, wouldn't that be a great place to advertise, X brand of rum, for example? And you have to think about the audience there, and the regulator thinks about the audience. It's not just you and me and all those lovely people who enjoy a rum cocktail. It's children, it's vulnerable people who really don't need to see this advertising. We're not talking to them, and actually, it kind of makes them feel quite that it normalizes it, if you like, at an age when it doesn't need to be normalized. They don't need to think making a rum cocktail is a thing you do in your spare time. That comes later in life. You don't need to push that into their faces at that moment in time.
Really interesting. Very interesting. I feel like we're going to already begin to kind of touch on, this week's kind of article that we're going to sort of dissect together. But just before we go on to that, responsible and ethical marketing, I was fascinated to get you on, because there is almost that notion of can you act responsibly and ethically when ultimately you're selling something that, as you've just alluded to, is at the heart of it, in certain instances and promoted to certain groups, it's ultimately, and that's an unethical thing to do in of itself. So I'm just fascinated to get your take on what ethical, responsible marketing means to you, and why, I guess, the invite for coming on the Responsible Edge was something you wanted to take on.
So yeah, absolutely, it is possible to market these products that have ethical challenges to the right people, to the people who you want to buy your product. And the majority of people, when we're talking about gambling, when we're talking about drinks, when we're talking about other restricted products, relatively, it's only a proportion of people that have a real problem with that. And I think the challenge is for the marketer to make sure that A, you're not encouraging excessive play or excessive drinking to those people who are vulnerable. You shouldn't be showing, for example, that drinking a rum, for example, is a way to attract someone from the opposite sex, for example, or to make you appear successful, to make your life look like it's all rosy. And the same goes for gambling products. You shouldn't be showing, and we can't show people gambling as a way of getting themselves out of a financial hole, for example. You have to be responsible in your advertising, because there's always a section of the audience for whom this product presents a problem. And this is becoming easier for marketers to do, as that there are more and more targeting options available to us with the growth of digital advertising. We're much more able to exclude people who have said themselves, they've often put their hand up themselves and said, I have a problem with gambling, so please don't show me this ad. We can exclude people who are underage, for example, and just target those people who are in the market for this particular product who don't have a problem.
Really interesting. I think And that's such a compelling way of addressing that concern, the way you've just described that. I think, yeah, it's an understanding and appreciation of the time and the place, essentially. The targeting, as you say, is the absolute key. Really interesting, Karen. Let's move on. We've already touched on a few themes. Let's move on to the article from our cousins over in Australia. And would you mind just start by just giving a flavour for our listeners of what the article covered? I think it was a May 23 article, but thought some of the points were quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was an excellent article, and it really highlighted the growing concern in Australia that the more gambling ads there are in the general, within media that you see, the more gambling is becoming normalized. And actually, by advertising in your average football match, the odds, for example, of someone winning, the odds of someone scoring a goal, you're actually normalizing this for audiences, that actually gambling is part of watching sport. Now, for some people, that's great. Maybe it does. I can remember Sky. I think it was Sky had the line, "It matters more when you've got money on it, essentially, when you've got cash on it, when you're part of the game." And that's okay for some people. Maybe that is part of the overall experience. But what that is actually doing is saying to particularly a younger audience, this is what you do. You don't watch football, you don't watch rugby unless you've got a bet on the game. And that's normalizing betting for an audience who may never have thought about it before. So it's not just encouraging people who like to put a bet on anyway to wager on the game. It's actually making it feel normal for everyone. That's exactly what you do. So it raised some very interesting points about the impact of gambling advertising on the audience at large.
What did you think, Karen? I'm almost going to jump to the kind of crescendo of the article. I thought it was really interesting. I have to admit, I learned lots about like the different our European neighbors in terms of what they've done in terms of gambling advertising. I think like Belgium, for example, has just has a flat out ban on all gambling related ads. Yeah. The article was essentially calling for like the end, if you like, of gambling related ads. Like, as somebody with your experience, etc., like, what's your take on that? Is that ultimately the outcome that we're working towards here in the UK, do you think?
I mean, yes and no. I think there is a case for pure gambling, betting, if you like, to be compelled to take a more targeted approach, so that it's not necessarily something that is broadcast to everyone watching that football match. And I think there are ways the regulators can compel the gambling companies to do that. I think you have to be careful with that. Gambling isn't for everyone. It isn't good for everyone, but for a lot of people, it brings quite a lot of enjoyment. And also there is a tax on this that raises a lot of revenue for the government. Now, if you stopped advertising gambling full stop, of course, revenues would go down. Now, there would be some people who would still gamble no matter what, but also there are people for whom it would be not something they thought of doing. So gambling revenues would go down, as would revenue to the Treasury. And whilst that should, that is that what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about ethical marketing? Well, if we were being purist about it, maybe not, but it is a commercial reality. It's a reality for the government, as well as some, excluding or making it more difficult for people who actually enjoy something to access an activity they enjoy. So I think it's quite a difficult ethical question. Do you just ban it altogether and effectively ban the advertising altogether and take it kind of underground? Or do you say to the companies, look, you've got all this technology available now, why don't you start targeting specific audiences and showing us that is what you're doing, so that it is targeted at the right people and not people who don't need to see it, people for whom gambling is something, they're not even old enough to take part in, and why expose that to them to that at this stage? Why try and influence their behavior at this stage?
Couldn't agree with that more. I thought another interesting piece in the article, Karen, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, was it had the suggestion, I think it compared sort of the sort of next stage in terms of gambling advertising with tobacco, and the suggestion that like there was almost two things that occurred. First of all, the outright ban of advertising of tobacco products, and then almost like a public health kind of more positive promotion of like the lifestyle benefits associated with not smoking, essentially. I thought it was interesting that the suggestion was that those two things had to go kind of hand in hand. Again, my ill-informed view was, well, hold on a minute, surely we can both have ads for gambling, but equally perhaps have other campaigns that are delivered to talk about maybe some of the benefits of not gambling, or of maybe choosing to find that kind of enjoyment, etc., in other areas. So what was your take on that? It seemed to me that it was very binary when it perhaps could be a bit more nuanced than that.
Yes, I think that, yeah, I mean, it could, I mean, the benefits of not gambling, well, you know, that's quite difficult to promote in a way that people will sit up and take notice. What I think is good, and what happens a lot in this country, there are campaigns where do you go if you think you're gambling too much? And we've seen it. One of the gambling companies, one of the betting companies says, when the fun stops, stop. So when you're not gambling anymore for fun, but you are gambling because you want to win back your losses, just stop. It's not fun anymore. Take a pause. And that has been quite a big campaign. And there are more and more dedicated campaigns from people like GamStop and Gamble Aware around this. What do you do if you think you're gambling too much? And I think that is a very positive take on how you minimize the impacts of gambling. You give people help when they need it. You help, you know, you send out that message that there is somewhere to go if you think it's becoming too much. And also, you know, saying to people like you and me, who have the odd flutter, sometimes it does get too much. Look at these people who've already come to us and said, I need help managing what is this effective habit. It is sad and unfortunate that for some people that is not enough, and for some people, any kind of gambling, you know, is temptation, and it has led to tragic consequences. For me personally, I'd come down on the regulating gambling so it goes to the right audiences, and making sure that every gambling company is compelled to say loud and clear where to go if you think you've got a habit that is becoming too much to handle.
And Karen, that's really interesting. Not to get into legalese on it, but that's not the case currently in the UK.
At the moment, there is an encouragement in terms of regulation that all of your marketing carries a link, a link or a logo of where to go if you feel you have a problem with gambling. It's an advisory. It's not compelling companies at this stage. Certainly not in the lottery space. That may be different. I'm not quite so well versed in the real betting end of the spectrum, but certainly in the lottery world, we were encouraged to make it very clear to players and participants, people that see our advertising generally, where they could go if they had a problem or someone they knew had a problem. So yeah, not necessarily compulsory, but a strong advice from the regulator that is the way we should be going.
And so that's really interesting. So from your experience, just packaging the whole thing together, if you like, making sure that your ads are truly targeted, your marketing is truly targeted, that you're hitting the right people at the right time, essentially, with your ads and your marketing, and then acknowledging that whilst encouraging that market to engage in gambling, which is obviously the purpose of the promotion, there's
Absolutely.
almost like that stop safe, that safety net, if you like, that if it gets too much, then this is what you can do next.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair kind of packaging up? I know I've massively oversimplified things, but
no, Charlie, I think you've got the highlights there. I think that's the way the industry as a whole is going. Absolutely. Targeted ads, as you say, and then a clear signpost as to where to go if you think it gets too much.
And just, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. and again,
Yeah.
happy to suggest this is too strong a question, but did you ever feel at any time, is there a bit of a contradiction in terms here, in terms of encouraging people to do something and then ultimately also encouraging them to seek help if they engage in that activity and it ultimately becomes too much? Was there ever a sense of like the moral, like ethical dilemma that, if you like, at the heart of that? I know you touched on it before, but can you just explain like how, you know, for you, there is that distinction between fun and enjoyable usage of or engagement with gambling, and then ultimately the support for those that need help with it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of data out there that actually shows that most people gamble in what can be considered a safe way. And that's what the vast majority of people do. It's not endemic. A problem gambling isn't an endemic. So I think in a way, and I would draw the parallels on drinking, drinking alcohol. Many people enjoy it. The majority of people do it in a safe way. If we said, well, we're going to ban all of advertising and essentially start pushing the idea of enjoying alcohol into a dark corner of the world, how would we feel about that? But nonetheless, we still have adverts and promotions, and we give information about things like Alcoholics Anonymous. If you go to your GP and you think you've got a problem with drinking, your GP can help you, because the majority of people drink alcohol in a safe and responsible way. And it is the same for gambling. I mean, it's very sad and unfortunate that stories come to the fore all of the time about people who've had problems with gambling, and it's led to them taking their own life, for example, really impacting their families' lives. It's the same, I think, for alcohol. I think gambling at the moment, because potentially I think there's been a lot of pressure on the regulator to put in more safeguards, if you like, to compel gambling companies to be more responsible, that these stories are reaching the top. I personally don't think there's a reason to push these things into the dark corners, but I think we do need to put safety in there as well.
And so just touching on that, and I know you mentioned before about regulation, but in your mind and in your experience, Karen, what are the kind of things that you would like to see done? Let's focus back here on the UK in terms of regulation to just make things ultimately safer and more ethical, I guess, within the gambling space.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, and I think quite a lot has happened already in terms of the in-play betting and the in-game advertising before the watershed. We're seeing far less of that now. And I think that there is a case for maybe pulling back even more before the watershed on this kind of advertising. It's tough. Most games are played before 9:30 in the evening. So if you want to advertise your gambling product during that time, I think we need to put in more regulation in that particular case. Yeah.
Really interesting. And jumping into very much up to this point in the conversation, we focused on the targeting, the timing, etc. Excluding certain groups, which I think, it's really interesting to hear the kind of the stop safes that you've had in place when thinking about the way that you promoted some of these things before. Focusing now, like on the messaging or the campaign itself. Like, what are the nuances? Like when you were sat there, thinking about campaigns, from a lottery perspective, or when you're, thinking about from a gambling organization's point of view, like what are the key considerations that are going into those kind of campaigns that you're putting together?
So if we can touch on the lottery for a bit, and particularly the national lottery, I think we come up against another ethical issue here. The purpose of the national lottery, when it was founded 1994, was to raise money for good causes. So, and the national lottery is owned by the people and it's regulated by the government. So already we're taking this into quite a different space than we are regular gambling. So it's moving into this, it's here for good, and the government owns it. So, we're not talking now about William Hill or, Bet365. We're talking about something the government owns. And this presents a whole different ethical challenge, I think, because the license that to operate the national lottery, the obligation on the operator is to maximize returns to good causes. So the amount raised for good causes is linked to the sales value of lottery products. So to maximize returns to good causes, you've got to maximize sales. To do this, lottery products need to be promoted, be it on TV, be it on the radio, in the shops, or online. So you can see there, we're talking about something that's slightly different. This is something that the government actively wants to be successful, and the regulators in place to make sure that it is as successful as it can be within the guardrails of regulation. So that's interesting. But another part of the license as well also states that the operator has to protect the interests of national lottery participants, which actually includes absolutely preventing play by people under the legal age, which is now 18, and also not encouraging excessive play. So when we're looking at our marketing, for example, the guardrails that are in place, and we've got lotteries have their own advertising rules that are issued by the Advertising Standards Authority. And they say things like none of the content of any promotion can have strong appeal to under 18s. So we cannot have, for example, cartoon figures in there or anything that is likely to be talked about in the playground, for example. No content that can exploit vulnerable groups, such as those with gambling problems. So we can't, for example, encourage solitary play, which is seen as a signal that someone's got a bit of a problem if they are playing on their own. And I'm talking here particularly about online games. And we can't, your messages and your content can't take advantage or exploit an individual's particular circumstances. So you can't present playing the lottery as a solution to financial worries, issues of self-esteem, and you certainly cannot present it as a way of, as an alternative to work, if you like. So when we're talking about, what would you do if you won the lottery? It can't be, well, I'd pay off my mortgage and stop working, and wouldn't that be great? Because that is absolutely presenting it as an alternative to work. So that in itself represents a huge challenge to the marketer, as you can imagine. Why do I play the lottery? Well, in our heart of hearts, what I just said, I'd like to pay my mortgage off, I'd like to go on some big holidays, I'd like to work less, are areas that we can't go to. The holiday maybe, but not the giving up work, not the, having this life of leisure. Very, very challenging.
I was going to say, that was fantastically explained, Karen, because it's so difficult as a marketeer. You're literally on the one hand being, encouraged to maximize, as you say, revenue generation for good causes, and on the other hand, not encourage excessive play, when in actual fact, this excessive play would realize more funds for good causes. So there's a fundamental contradiction in many ways at play within the decision making that you're having to contend with.
No, totally. For many people, and I would take this stance, lottery is actually on the whole, lottery is the soft end of the gambling market. For many people, for most people, lottery is seen as a bit of harmless fun. And actually, if you think about the big games, Lotto, Euro Millions, it's very difficult to become addicted to those games because you select your numbers for a draw that happens only twice a week. Mm-hmm. So there's not that buzz of, for example, horse racing. I've just bet 50 quid on this race. Damn, my horse didn't come in. But there's another race in 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm going to put 100 quid on that to see if I can win it back. That isn't the case at all in draw-based games. Because once you've bought your ticket, you have to wait for the draw to happen. You have to wait for it to be checked and then made public. You don't get a buzz. There's another part of the lottery, the scratch cards, that are potentially a bit more problematic because due to the instant win nature of the games, you can buy a scratch card, damn, I didn't win, you can go back and buy another. And small wins often also lead people, if they've just won 2 quid, 10 quid, rather than think I'll take that home and, get a takeaway, or I'll, buy my kids something, or I'll save that money. They want to reinvest and play again. So that is by many more people seen as an area, potentially problematic area that the lottery operator has to be very cautious around.
So it's fascinating. There were two things jumped in my head. Firstly, my partner Vic, and shout out to Victoria, she very much does exactly what you suggested there, which is every time the scratcher comes through and she's won that £10, it's back on, those next set of scratch cards. So yeah, she's a keen player in that sense. But it's all good, harmless fun, and it doesn't go beyond that. What's fascinating with what you just described there, though, is that within this incredibly complex and nuanced decision-making framework that you've got as a marketeer about how you go about factoring in all these different elements to decide how to appropriately promote something, that is then subject to be different depending upon the type of product that you're promoting within the lottery framework. So that is, I mean, what, Karen, I've got I've had obviously a great found respect for you at the beginning of this call as a marketeer, but I think it's just gone through the roof. This is amazing. So let me ask you, so how, in terms of these considerations, what were the implications for your decision making? Like, was it as simple as going, right, we need to have, more of our campaigns that focus on the positive, like good cause outcomes associated with play versus the personal impact? Or just give us a flavor of like how this stuff influenced, the campaigns that you delivered.
Yeah, you're touching on a really interesting point then when we talk about good causes, because you think, well, why play the lottery? Because a certain proportion, roughly a quarter, I don't know, it varies from game to game, of what you spend on the lottery goes straight to good causes. Fantastic. But for people, when you ask them, and we did quite a lot of research in this area, it's a little bit of like, so what? If I want to give money to charity, I will give money to charity. So as a way of getting people to come in and start playing, it's not that compelling. Different if you're playing the lottery, for example, and you haven't won for a bit, and you're like, why am I bothering to do this? Oh, well, I'm still giving money to charity. It kind of is it doesn't work as a way to suck people in, but it maybe works as a way to keep people in, because actually they quite enjoy it. They quite enjoy checking the numbers. They get a little bit frustrated when they don't win, but hey, I may as well keep going because at least, I'm giving, it's doing some good along the way. So you've got an interesting dynamic there, but I would say one of the challenges for the operator is to make sure as many people play the lottery a little to maximize revenues rather than a small amount of people playing a lot. So you can imagine the challenges to make sure that we get lots and lots of people playing. So you need to look somewhere else other than good causes to bring these people in. And I think our research shows people play for fun. They do want to win big. But they ultimately want to play for the dream. It's once you bought your ticket, you have a dream in your pocket. And until that draw is made and you haven't won, that dream is still alive. And that's quite a compelling idea for people. The idea that I can dream about what my life would be, and that kind of elevates me from the everyday. So the dream is really important, as well as, some of the small wins, sometimes winning a few thousand, or even winning 20 quid for a lot of people, just gives them a lift for that day. So the positioning around these products is much more about life enhancement than an alternative, for example, to things like work, which the regulations that are very clear you can't do. So yeah, that's the kind of area you have to look at. That fun dream, what would I do? What could I do? And also, as you might have seen, there's some new lotto advertising out that talks about, could you be next? It's all about that dream. It's that excitement and fun of being part of it.
Fascinating, Karen. Is dream in your pocket? Was that a slogan for a campaign that you produced?
It wasn't actually, but it was an insight that we very much kept in our heads when we're looking at creative ideas. That idea of once you're in, and you've got permission to dream.
I love it. I'm compelled to go. I'm not a lottery player myself, but I am now. I mean, yeah, the prospect of going out and getting a dream in my pocket. I love that. Fascinating. Here's a slightly more tricky question, but kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, I guess, and thinking about, the focus of your career and obviously moving into gambling from drinks, etc. what are the kind of key lessons that you learned from your experience of being quite constricted, I guess, or constricted is probably the wrong term, but having to factor in so many nuances of regulation and requirement, etc., conflicting requirement in many ways, working within the lottery space. What are the key lessons that you think are most applicable or useful to other marketeers out there that are thinking about how to market what they do responsibly, ethically, etc.?
Yeah. I think it's don't push against the regulation. Don't think you can go to the regulator and make a compelling argument as to why something should be allowed. If the regulator says no, just don't touch it. You're wasting time and energy trying to get round regulation rather than moving right away from it, looking at a fresh space and mining that for insights and creativity. So just first of all, don't go near it. Don't think you can find a way around it. Frustrating as it is, just move away. And the other thing is get yourself a good legal representative who really understands the regulation. Because then, if you have something that that the regulator feels is a little bit close to the bone, you haven't intended it to be, but they're a little bit unsure about it, your legal counsel can put the best argument together that you're ever going to have. And they are by and large sensible people, and if you get a good person working with you, they understand what you're trying to do, but they also understand the regulation, and they help you navigate your way through that. So those are the two things I think that I've learned that I think going into any regulated industry, I would want to pass on to people.
Can I ask as well? Again, I'm jumping around a bit here, Karen, but I'm just compelled to ask this. You're in terms of your sort of next stage in career, are you looking to sort of liberate yourself from a more regulated industry, or what's next for you?
I am just looking around, Charlie, at the moment. I think there's some really interesting opportunities out there in terms of helping companies that have to navigate this kind of regulation to really think creatively, and to use that term that neither of us like, think out of the box. I think that's something that I would really welcome. And I'm also interested in kind of ethical marketing generally, the ethics of the brand. How do we make sure that the brand has a place in this changing 21st century environment? How do we talk to the Gen Zs of the world to make sure that the brand is something that fits in with their world? They are going to be the most challenging set of consumers we've ever had, in terms of, you are the lottery, you do this. Okay, I can live with that, but what else do you do? What is your environmental policy, et cetera, which I think takes you into a whole nother area. But I think that's a really interesting and growing area. And companies really need to take note of that, because doing nothing isn't the solution.
Karen, I love that response for two reasons, because it seems to me, and again, I should say to our listeners that Karen and I have only met for the first time doing this podcast. So this is straight off the bat, and I hope not. Hope she's not going to want to get this edited out. But when thinking about your experience of regulation and how you viewed, as you've alluded to in that feedback, that actually regulation, you just need to understand it and be more creative in light of it, is an incredibly positive attitude, as is the idea that actually with Gen Z and with essentially becoming more discerning, more needy customers in many ways, that actually that's not an issue, that's an opportunity. So it's a really kind of like positive attitude, Karen, in many ways, I think, towards these what other people could view as perhaps hindrances or problems or issues to overcome. So I just wanted to feed that back as part of our conversation. It's really interesting. Just touching on and we've moved away slightly from the focus of the conversation, but you mentioned about the ethics of brands, and obviously some of the things around environmental policies, et cetera. What do you think, if you were working with a new organization and thinking about like how do we kind of adopt this 21st century kind of positioning of a brand ethically, like what are your absolute go-tos? What are the key things that you think need to be considered as sort of a first port of call for a brand?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I worked with some great people when I was at Allwyn who are really on top of this, things around social value, for example. So what is your environmental policy? What's your stand on net zero for the company? What's your policy on DE and I? I mean, and let's have some examples of where this is absolutely in action. I mean, those are two incredibly important things. And also, who are you working with? Are many of your suppliers, for example, working in the maybe less than desirable industries like oil extraction? You make the call as a company who you will and won't work with. I think that's really key. And I think that's the kind of thing that the consumers, the up and coming consumers of tomorrow, the Gen Zs, are really interested in. They don't want to work with a company that is making money out of exploitation, for example. You may have the greatest DE&I policies in and anti-slavery, etc. rules in the UK, but what's going on in your markets in the Middle East? What's going on with your companies in the Middle East? It is a through-the-line commitment to social value, to be a company that's fit for the 21st century. And these are hugely important things, as well as looking after things like the mental health of your employees, contributing to society, contributing to your local area. A huge list of things to be considered.
It's really interesting. We've had a few podcasts that have touched on, association risk essentially, and how like where does the jurisdiction stop? And ultimately, I think you're absolutely right. It's changing to the point where we're such an interconnected and information readily available world that we live in, that actually there is no stone that won't be unturned in terms of a customer or potentially an employee or another form of stakeholder ultimately looking to understand your company and its position. So there's nowhere to hide essentially anymore.
There's nowhere to hide. And I think it even goes down to who you work with. If you look at the advertising industry, there's a lot of talk about greenwashing. Are some of these advertising agencies working with companies that have potentially harmful products? Are they helping them to greenwash them, to actually tell the world they're not as harmful as they are? And there's been a lot of movement by creatives in the industry to call this out and to compel companies to move away from doing this. So it's all around us in marketing. It's not going to go away. It's just going to become more deeply entrenched, I think.
Can I ask you a question that is really fascinating? One question that came out of one of our recent podcasts was, we were debating whether or not you feel like you can authentically retrofit an organization with these kind of values and principles, or whether or not actually inherently you have to have these have got to be foundational ways of working and principles. And the debate was had that I think we concluded that it can be done, but it's almost like if it's not a foundational part of your setup, then you almost have to do more in order to convince people and yourself maybe that is your new direction. I know it was slightly spurious, but just your comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was working for Allwyn, the new company that's operating the National Lottery, we were a new company, so we were able to come in at the bottom and build up from there. I think if you're another company where you realize that things are not all good at the foundation, I think you have to be very honest with yourself, with your company, and with your stakeholders. And that might include your consumers, and make statements about, as part of moving forward, this is what the company are now doing. And really be honest that maybe things weren't right in the past, but you are moving in the right way now. And sometimes that has a little bit of backlash if people didn't know, for example, that that part of your stock was invested in a company mining diamonds in South Africa. They didn't know that. But by saying you're divesting from that, you're going to get a bit of backlash. But also, I think people do understand that there's a need to, companies need to move on. And, hats off to them for being honest and doing this. And that's what I think we should see, not companies trying to pretend they never did this kind of thing in the first place, but being honest when they're making positive moves in the right direction.
I love that. I think that's exactly, I would totally agree with that. It's look, we've all got a past, it's about acknowledging that past and suggesting what the new path forward is. I think it was, I'm going to forget the glasses brand that came up with this, but they did a brilliant, and I think actually it's our podcast, so I think we can swear on here, but they did a brilliant campaign saying it was like we fucked up basically campaign, and they went through and they literally detailed out like, here was something that we got wrong, and here's how we addressed it. And it was brilliantly put together. And obviously the language was fairly provocative, but it was just done in such a way that you actually read it and you thought, do you know what? I'm the fact that you have been so upfront and so clear about the issues that you've had, but what you have done to address them, I now feel compelled to trust in the journey that you're taking us on.
Yeah, it gets it all out there. There's no skeletons in
Mm.
the cupboard. No one's going to come, did you know?
Yeah.
And this is the reason why we shouldn't. It's all out there. It's like
Yeah.
crisis management, isn't it? You're being honest up front, and then that's done. You're able to move on. It's the same. It's the same kind of principle, I think. Get it out, be honest, and move forward.
Stake in the ground crisis management. Yeah, I like that.
Yes.
No, I like it. Karen, I'm just got my stock clock next to me, and we've whistled through 45 minutes. So I'm going to ask you for your number one or key bit of advice that you would have offered your younger self or a junior marketeer sort of embarking on their career. It doesn't have to be ethical or responsible marketing related, but just anything that comes to mind.
I think one piece of advice I give to people, and I wish I'd known at the time, is read the room. When you're a marketeer, you might think you've got the best idea, the best strategy. You may have worked with a team, an advertising agency that's got a brilliant idea, and you can do your best to sell that idea in. But if the room's not listening because it's preoccupied with something else, wrap it up in a nice little box and shelve it for the time being. The time will come that read the room and understand when the time is right, and listen for those cues from those people around you about what you should be doing here and now. I think that's a piece of advice I'd give anyone. Read the room, listen to what's going on, and go with it. The time will come for you to shine with something new and original, but it isn't always when you think it's going to be.
Brilliant. Absolutely. To be honest with you, Karen, thank you for giving me a very good bit of advice. I'm going to adopt that into this afternoon's workshop. So thank you for that. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you on, Karen. I won't put you on the spot and ask you if you'll come back, but I certainly will be after we conclude the recording. But thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Charlie.